right, so we're going to get started with our next session. So this is my favorite / most awkward part of Authenticate, where I have to introduce myself as a speaker. But so I'm Megan Shamus. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing for the FIDO Alliance. I'm happy to welcome you here for this session. I have with me Barry McMahon, who's the Director of Marketing at LastPass, as well as Adrian Loth, who is our Marketing Manager over at FIDO Alliance as well. And we're here to talk to you about some of our recent research that we just released on Monday around passwordless plans, attitudes, both from a consumer and a workforce perspective. So thank you for coming. I'm going to transition to my chair now. I'm MC, now I'm speaker. Okay. Thank you.
All right, so like Megan said, we're going to be talking about passwordless perspectives for the consumer and workforce. If you were here for Andrew's keynote, you probably heard him talk a little bit about some of the data. We're going to dive a little bit into it and also just share some added insights. So if you didn't download already, there's QR codes for you to download both reports. I encourage you to do that. You can see all the data there. But first, we'll just talk a little bit about what the reports looked at, what we studied, and what the key findings were. Megan, do you want to start?
Yeah, so this is our third year doing this authentication barometer, which is to gauge not so much what are consumers like wanting to do to sign in, but what are they actually doing to sign in on a daily basis. And the reason why we care is because, well, we're trying to get rid of passwords, right? So if we can see some decrease in password usage over time and increase in pass keys and FIDO over time, then we know that we're meeting our mission. So our barometer, we just released it on Monday. This is our third year doing that, and we're just looking at their habits, the trends, what they're actually doing on a day-to-day basis, how they view security of different authentication methods. And we do this in 10 countries, and so that's like around 1,000 consumers per country. So that adds up to 10,000 consumers that we survey on a yearly basis. What about you, Barry? Oh, so we had, so why is Barry here? So I'll tell you. So we actually had a really serendipitously, LastPass was looking to do a similar survey, but from a workforce perspective. So lucky enough, we can look at consumer habits and trends at the same time looking at workforce. So Barry, if you want to tell a little bit more about the research that we co-sponsored.
Yeah, so obviously LastPass has services that serve the consumer market and services that serve the B2B market as well. And we've done a lot of research ourselves, primary research over the years. One of the biggest reports that we've done was Psychology of Passwords. And that looked at some of the paradoxes that existed between, using passwords in the consumer space and using passwords in the business space. So, when we engaged with Megan and Adrian around doing some joint research, it actually just married really well. Right, FIDO look at the consumer space and had been looking at the consumer space for some years, and then what we wanted to do is we wanted to see what was and how was that translating into the workforce. One of the main reasons is obviously the hype around passwordless, and then the advances that's been made around pass keys as well. And we've done sponsored research. We've also done some of our own research around that too, because obviously we want to understand what's happening in the market, what's happening in the base, what's happening with the opportunities that may be arising. So this was a really good opportunity to have a look at some of that stuff. So, being able to partner with FIDO was fantastic. We looked at over 1,000 respondents in 5 different countries. So we looked across the US, UK, Australia, France, and Germany. And the data, while the report is global, we will be releasing some regional stuff as well, and you can see some of the habits and behaviours that change. But it's no surprise that when you start seeing people using different solutions in the personal and the consumer environment, how that bleeds and leads into some of the behaviours that they bring into the workforce as well. So that was one of the main drivers for doing the report.
So I think Adrian asked us to share some of the key findings, which neither of us did. So maybe we should we do that part first, or do you want to go back to the previous slide, and then I can share some of the. Yeah, so did anyone come to my talk last year on the barometer? Thank you. One of my key things was, and it's not surprising, yeah, consumers are still using passwords. And what we did find still, so we were looking at, okay, how many folks are like manually entering passwords? So that is still, a pretty big number. But what was actually interesting and also not surprising is they're still using passwords without any MFA or 2FA or whatever the term du jour is for this. And of course, I have my own opinions on this, or at FIDO we have our own opinions on this, but generally consumers don't turn on these features because they're sort of a hassle. So that wasn't too surprising. There's still a lot of password use. But when we asked them, what kind of authentication methods do you like? Do you want to use? These folks like biometrics. I don't know if anyone's surprised by this. I know when we did our UX research, I watched videos of folks like going through the enrollment process with passkeys, and of course biometrics are a big part of that. And what we found was, yeah, there's still some folks that are not into biometrics, mostly because they think it's going to be stored in the cloud somewhere. But once you explain to them this is device-based biometrics, they actually really, really love it. And our survey research showed that as well. So biometrics is one of their most desired form of authentication. And then the other thing that we looked at is how often are folks abandoning a sign-in or a transaction because they forgot their password and they just don't want to go through the hassle of reset. And so a lot of folks are still abandoning purchases, they're still abandoning sign-ins because they just can't get into their accounts. So those are sort of the top things that resonated with me from the research. But we'll go into some of the other stuff too.
Over to me.
Do you want to talk about the findings?
Yeah, there's a couple of main findings that we were hoping to get some data around. I guess it's kind of no surprise that nearly 90% or over 90% of the respondents of the survey, and these were kind of IT leaders within their businesses, said that they either have or are planning to move to passwordless. And that was a fantastic finding for us, right? Because we can talk about it in a few minutes. Particularly password managers, I think the expectation was with passwordless that password managers would suddenly, die away. And if anything, they're going to become more important because if you have a digital key, you need to store it somewhere. So that was really interesting to find out. That actually backed up one of the stats and one of the pieces of research that we done earlier in the year where we found that, over 90% did want to have it in their business and were looking to have it in their business, but they also want to do it end to end for everybody in the business, which when you look at different identity and access management tools, they typically don't cover everybody in the business. So being able to offer a passwordless solution for everybody across the whole business was actually quite a strong finding as well. So yeah, and then I guess maybe the obvious thing is that they all expect that passkeys will improve their security posture. And that might sound a little bit obvious, but when you see how many of these organizations are actually still using passwords today and may not be using any push authentication or push notifications to authenticate against different things, they're still using passwords heavily in their business today. So using passkeys and going passwordless will help with their overall security posture as well.
I was surprised. I think, did you say it was no surprise that most organizations are planning to move to passwordless? I was surprised. 92%. I was like, what? Because I think we did a survey similar to that like 2 years ago, and it was like, no. So that was really a pleasant surprise for me, that folks understand that they need to be, from the workforce perspective, that they understand that they want to be moving over to passwordless. And then just the awareness, from the awareness perspective, awareness around passkeys was really high with consumers too. I mean, grain of salt a little bit with, when you ask someone, do you know what a passkey is, or have you heard of passkeys? And they say yes. but still encouraging because, again, that awareness has just been, it's way higher than it was last year when we asked that question. And that was the first year we actually asked that question because the concept of passkeys didn't exist before that. So I think just the overall awareness and understanding that, from a workforce perspective, but also a consumer perspective, like, this is something that, again, we're not at the awareness stage. We're closer to needing to be at enablement stage because folks, they know what this is. They know they need to move to it, but we need to give them more guidance on how to do that.
All right, so Megan, this question's for you. Now that we've been monitoring consumer perspectives for about 3 years, what trends are you starting to see in the way consumers understand or feel about the shift away from passwords?
Well, kind of, I guess I kind of touched on this in my last rambling answer. So, so awareness of passkeys, from, like a third to a half from last year, that's really important. It's a terminology thing, right? This is a new term. And if folks are recognizing it and understanding it, that's a really big win for us. Because, when they're prompted, when, services add this and then they're prompted to sign up, that's going to be, a big part of the curve of adoption. So that makes me happy to see that. And then I know I mentioned biometrics earlier, but so again, folks seem to be embracing biometrics. They believe actually it's the most secure form of signing in for what's available to them today over even passwords or even password plus SMS or password plus push or all of these options that we gave to them. So I think that's really encouraging because, like I said earlier, when we talk to folks about biometrics, part of the worry is that they're going to think it's going to be stored in a cloud or it could be vulnerable. But I think what we're seeing is, pretty much a nice embrace of biometrics. So I think those are, the main takeaways that I had for that.
Yeah, I think if I remember from our last year's survey, that shift in biometrics it was a big shift from last year. They really were not so sure about biometrics, and now they seem to be really embracing it, like you said. All right, so Barry, this is the first year that we've done this workforce report. Was there anything that surprised you in the findings or that really stood out?
Yeah, we probably went searching for a couple of different attitudes and expectations from the respondents. So there's probably 3 main things that stood out. One was shadow IT and how passkeys can help resolve or solve for elements of shadow IT. When we talk to customers and prospects and even just listen to the market, shadow IT is always such a big problem for them to try and solve. And they know it's a problem, but it's very hard to take it out of the shadows, right, and shine a light on it. They end up then with data in different areas that they can't, protect, they can't ensure that it's compliant and so on. And like with SaaS and apps and everything else, it's just so easy to get shadow IT into place. So, with passkeys, that will obviously help with that. It mightn't stop it, but at least they know that if they're using services that, can honor passkeys and log in with passkeys, then they can't have any, phishable, the credentials, well, the lack of credentials can't be phished, right? So that was one thing. The other thing was that we went to, and we wanted to find out about the storing of passkeys and how would they be stored. And it was almost a 70-30 split. So I think it was about 69% of respondents said that they would want to store their passkeys in a password management tool or a credential management tool, such as LastPass and others. And then the other 30% actually wanted a choice of where to store them, and they could be in browser-based password management tools as well. So that was really interesting as well. And then obviously that's kind of what's going to happen in the immediate, if you like, the immediate future. Then what's going to happen over the next number of years? And for us, being a password manager, we wanted to get our heads around, well, when do we see passwords falling off? Because everybody's been talking about the death of the password. I think Bill Gates talked about the death of the password 20-something odd years ago. and everybody's still going on about it. So
2004.
well, there you go, 19 years ago. So like, where is the death of the password, and is it coming any closer now with passkeys? And what we found was that almost 70% of IT leaders said that they would be using passwords for less than 25% of their applications across the next 5 years, which I think it's a little bit optimistic, if I'm honest. I think that's, but it's a goal, right? And if that's what they're aiming towards, well then, you know, they mightn't get to the 25%, but they might get damn close to it. So you have to have an aspiration of where you want to achieve, but I think that's probably a little, maybe a little optimistic. But they were some of the main findings that we found from the report.
Yeah, I think I only know it's 2004 because that's the year I was born. So,
That's the biggest laugh of the day.
that is Christine. No, but I think it's awesome. I also agree that it's optimistic, but I love that optimism. I love that this is something that these organizations are really striving to do, and really, when I saw that number, I was like, I wouldn't have expected them to be that optimistic about it, but that really shows that they understand, you know, they need to do this. In the 5 years, it sounds, 5 years, that's a long time from now, but if you're actually moving an entire workforce to passwordless, that's relatively short in my mind, yeah.
So what do these reports tell you about the state of authentication today, both from the workforce and consumer perspective? So Barry, would you like to go first?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting. I think, you know, we've done, you know, as I said earlier on, we've done quite a bit of research into the kind of attitudes and behaviours of IT leaders across a broad range of security tools down through the years. And with passwordless, and particularly with passkeys, I think there's been a big shift. People and IT leaders now, they're starting to think about the user experience first, because they really are understanding now that the only real way to get passwordless into the business and have it adopted at a high level is to start with the end user and think of the user experience and how seamless can you make that. And we've seen some, you know, case studies that have been done and presented here at FIDO this week, where the majority of them started with the end user first and tried to work back on what's the user experience and so on, and make it extremely frictionless to and seamless to the end user. So I think that's one of the big things that we're seeing around the authentication piece. I think the other piece is that the cost or the return on investment is evident and obvious, but it's not a real determinant factor. I think it still keeps coming back to the user experience. And if you can nail the user experience, I think the cost and some of the return on investment will just happen, right? Like, you know, IT ticket desk and supports and resets and all that kind of stuff. And we can ramble on about the list of them all day. I think the other thing is that there's still a lot of education needed in the space. I think passwordless, everybody has maybe a different concept around what passwordless is, what it means for them, what the use case is for them, and so on. So I think nailing that down a little bit better and being a little bit more educated, and that's why it's great to have conferences like this where people can come along and actually hear the use cases, see where it's been deployed, see that it's not, you know, the exact same flavor for everybody. So yeah, they're probably the main things.
We did a smaller survey, workforce-oriented survey last year. That it was just in the United States, and the same thing came out, which was, you know, what is the biggest barrier? And it was education. It wasn't cost. It wasn't anything else, which was surprising. But I mean, I'm like, I guess we're not doing our job so well. But I think that is actually a good thing. But because what they need now, they know. So it's not a question of if; it's a question of how and when. And I think that what we need to be doing and what we're focusing on at the FIDO Alliance is, again, like if you heard my opening talk or Andrew's opening talk, really moving to like an era of enablement where we really have to start documenting and giving these folks playbooks so that they can go out there and get these projects done. And Simon Moffat with CyberHut, we talked about that yesterday in his session where he shared some research as well, where they need a little bit of direction in like, okay, what's the first step? What's the second step? What's the third step? But anyway, the first step is usually the hardest one. So I think it's just really important that we're all working together to get some of these, kind of guidebooks or playbooks to these enterprise organizations and for workforce implementations, just so like there isn't as much of we don't get that as the answer for next year. Because if we get that as the answer for next year, I'm going to be really unhappy.
Well, since you're speaking about next year, if we were to run these surveys again, what would you hope to see?
I just told you.
Barry.
I'd like to see the business and IT leaders have become a lot more educated around what's available for them. I think that's the biggest challenge. Like the technology works, right? The standards are there, and you can move in that direction if you want to. I think where leaders and companies are going to have to be just comfortable that this kind of frictionless experience, seamless experience is just going to work, and it's going to be as secure, if not more secure, than what they already have in place. And they're only going to be able to take that leap if they're educated and they're very clear that, okay, this is very comfortable. Because I definitely think that once you go passwordless, or you start allowing passwordless authentication or the passwordless experience within your business, I think it'll just take off like wildfire, because people will just see how seamless it is to access different things without having to hop through loads of different hoops at every stage. So, I think the leap forward will be around education. So I would like to see next year that these people are a lot more educated and they have actually put a milestone in place where they're going to execute against some of their plans.
I have one other thing in addition to that. I would please, for the love of God, like to see consumers not having to enter a password as much as we're seeing now. So if we could just that's the only part of it. Just, no, I'm not having to enter a password manually. So I think, yes, we're seeing some decreases there, but I really just want to see this thing take off, and I want next year's barometer to be evidence of that.
All right, anything else either of you want to add before we open up for questions?
Well, the only other thing I would add is that, it's nice to do a consumer survey alongside a workforce survey, because these people that we're surveying on the consumer side are also employees of these businesses. So it's nice to see that, the awareness even on the consumer side is as high as on the, workforce side, because the folks that we surveyed on the workforce side are, of course, the product managers and the folks that own these projects. But it's really nice to see these things coming together so that when and if it's time for workforce implementation to start, introducing this to their employees, that it's not going to be as, big of a curve.
Does anyone in the audience have questions? Jim?
So I actually want to key off of what Megan just said. So I do employee stuff and personal stuff on a single device. And just thinking about the password manager, I think that's one of my concerns would be, let's say I take an enterprise password manager and I save all of my workforce logins, but then I also save my banking and Little League account and all the different things that I do, and then I separate from the company and they take all my data. I would think that's one of the biggest concerns with password manager. What do you think of that?
So that's not necessarily what happens. So like from a LastPass perspective, right, when you separate from your employer, all of your own data goes into a free LastPass account and you take that with you. So your own data stays with you.
Maybe it's a misconception a lot of people have, though. I mean,
not everyone offers it, so.
Okay.
I didn't know that. I didn't actually know you could have your enterprise stuff and your personal stuff in one vault.
Yeah, so like password managers in general, some of them offer a solution where if you take the enterprise license for your organization, you also get what we call at LastPass families as a benefit. So it means for every user, they also get a family's account, which includes 5 or 6 personal accounts. Now, your organization may allow you to merge your personal account with your business account, or they may not. But if they do, it's very easy to separate them out. You can store stuff in the personal folder within your vault, And it's the exact same mechanic. You have a business folder within your vault, and as soon as you separate them out, you spin out your free version of LastPass, and you take that with you. So your data is never compromised.
Jim's not a plant, by the way. That
go.
was a legitimate question.
But thanks, Jim. I appreciate it.
Lori, we have a question in the front here.
So as someone who's building these products and kind of dedicated my career to going passwordless and getting people to use like public-private keys instead of passwords, how do we like not just sit back and watch FIDO and hope that FIDO's marketing takes off and educates everybody, but how to like collectively combine like the marketing efforts? Like, is there something we should do to reach out to FIDO, or how do we like make sure we're all giving a nice cohesive message so it's not confusing? And that when companies go to buy, like, hey, I'm ready to go passwordless, like, bang, here's a list, here's your options, here's the pros and cons.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. He's also not a plant. So I think, because I'm a huge believer in, the fact that this is not going to happen unless the message is consistent and, delivered, across the board by everybody, like as an industry effort. So we do have a few things. So the first thing is that we have a passkeys messaging guide that sort of lays out the way that we talk about it. So if you go to our fidalliance.org/passkeys, there's a lot of high-level information and also more technical information in the FAQ, which really lays out like how we're talking about this. But what we're also working on is so we had a website called loginwithfido.com, which we had to revamp for passkeys. So we're planning to relaunch those assets. So it's essentially assets that you can take as, are you a service provider or?
Yeah, we build a.
Yeah, so as a solutions or service provider can take these assets and sort of leverage them within your own educational initiatives, even if you wanted to just take it and rebrand it or whatever. It's really not about FIDO, it's about consistency of message. So we're gonna be launching that stuff by the end of the year, and that's really just gonna be freely available. So there's gonna be consumer-oriented materials and then workforce-oriented materials that will be available. And then the last piece is we do have working groups. So we have an enterprise deployment working group as well as a consumer deployment working group that are working on and putting out materials for like deeper implementation. So like best practices for, more on the technical side for implementation. And the enterprise group actually has a really nice paper series there's 5 papers that really can help guide workforces in like the early stages to think about different considerations for their own implementations. But to directly answer your question, you can reach out to me and we can talk about more ways that we can work together to ensure that the industry message is coming out. Because like we're a nonprofit, so we want everybody else to be the little foot soldiers going out there
specifically
and
like a device-bound key versus a syncable key versus a roaming key, a platform key, like those kind of terminologies that like
those things shouldn't
like
reach. Yeah, those things should not reach.
But there needs to be some way to differentiate, right? Like, hey, I'm looking for a solution, some kind of grid system. Like, hey, these products do this, these products do that. That would be...
So in the white paper series that I just talked about, there's a chart that lays out like very basic terminology for workforce sites. So device-bound or sync passkeys, that's never going to reach consumers. They do not need to know that. But what workforces do need to know that there's different security properties and usability properties for these different types of passkeys. So that paper actually I think is really nice, like just at a glance. Like these are the types, and there's really should only be 2. It should be device-bound or synced, but I know some other folks have different opinions on that. But and then just sort of lays out like the pros and cons depending on your use case. But it's things like that that we probably just need to ensure are distributed a little bit more widely so that you're able to leverage that.
Cool. Appreciate it.
That answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
All right, well, I think we're at time, but if you have questions, feel free to grab Megan or Barry afterwards or go enjoy lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.